The lights inside the AGT Pilipinas theater burned brighter than the sun outside, washing the stage in golden white. The audience buzzed with excitement, unaware that the next contestant would challenge everything they expected from comedy. Backstage, a thin Filipino man named Mateo Cruz stood quietly in line, his hands trembling, his clothes worn but clean. His shirt had been ironed so many times it had lost its shape. His shoes were borrowed, slightly too big, and taped at the soles. Mateo was 32 years old, but life had aged him far beyond his years. Mateo came from a small coastal village where the sea provided food only when it felt generous. His father had been a fisherman who never learned to swim, a cruel irony that ended his life during a sudden storm. Mateo was only 10 when his mother became both parents overnight. She washed clothes, cleaned houses, and sold snacks on the roadside. Mateo learned early that laughter was sometimes the only thing that made hunger feel smaller. When neighbors argued, he joked. When storms destroyed homes, he joked. Not because life was funny, but because laughter kept people breathing. As Mateo stepped onto the stage, the judges looked at him with curiosity mixed with skepticism. Simon Cowell adjusted his glasses, already smiling as if he expected something ridiculous. The crowd noticed Mateo's nervous posture, the way his hands shook as he waved. He introduced himself softly, his accent thick but warm. He said he was a comedian from the Philippines, and that alone triggered a ripple of laughter from the audience. Simon chuckled, not unkindly, but with the tone of someone who thought he already knew how this would end. Mateo began his set with simple jokes about poverty, about sharing one spoon with 3 siblings, about pretending to be asleep when creditors knocked on the door. Simon laughed louder with each line, slapping the desk, wiping tears from his eyes. The audience followed, roaring with laughter. At first, Mateo smiled, relieved that they were laughing with him and not at him. But deep inside, something twisted. He realized they found his suffering entertaining, amusing, almost cartoonish. Then came the first twist. Mateo paused. The laughter faded slightly. He looked straight at Simon and said, still smiling, that he was happy Simon was laughing because he used to laugh too, until his mother died in his arms after working 3 jobs in one day. The theater fell quiet, confusion replacing joy. Simon stopped mid-laugh, his smile frozen. Mateo continued, his voice calm, explaining that comedy saved him from becoming angry at the world. He said that poor people joke not because life is easy, but because crying costs more energy than laughing. The audience shifted in their seats. This was no longer a simple comedy act. Mateo switched gears effortlessly, turning pain into humor again, joking about how his dreams were so big they scared him more than failure. Simon laughed again, but this time it was different. It was slower, thoughtful, almost uncomfortable. The other judges leaned forward, sensing something unusual. Mateo talked about auditioning for AGT Pilipinas not to become famous, but to prove to himself that his life had meaning beyond survival. Then came the second twist. Halfway through his set, Mateo stopped joking entirely. He asked the judges if he could tell one true story without making it funny. The audience held its breath. Simon nodded, curious now. Mateo told the story of his little sister, who loved to dance but never owned shoes. He described how she danced barefoot on broken concrete, how she dreamed of performing on stage. One night, she fell sick. There was no money for a hospital. She died before sunrise. Mateo ended the story by saying that he learned something that day. Dreams don't die because they are silly. They die because people are too poor to protect them. Silence swallowed the theater. Simon Cowell didn't laugh. He didn't smile. He stared at Mateo, his expression unreadable. Some audience members wiped their eyes. Others looked shocked, unsure whether they were supposed to clap. Then Mateo did something unexpected. He smiled again and said, jokingly, that if his sister were alive, she would scold him for making rich people cry on television. Laughter returned, mixed with emotion. Simon laughed too, but his laughter cracked. He shook his head, clearly struggling to process what he had just witnessed. The judges began their comments. One judge praised Mateo's bravery. Another said his timing was incredible. Then Simon spoke. He admitted that at first, he thought Mateo would be just another funny audition, something to laugh at and move on from. He said that instead, Mateo reminded him why comedy mattered. Simon said laughter wasn't about mockery, but about connection. For the first time that day, Simon stood up. The crowd erupted. But the story didn't end there. As Mateo prepared to leave the stage, thinking his job was done, Simon stopped him. Simon asked Mateo why he never smiled when the audience laughed the hardest. Mateo answered honestly, saying he was afraid they were laughing at his pain, not understanding it. Simon paused, then said something that stunned everyone. He told Mateo that the best comedians don't make people laugh because they're funny, but because they're honest. Simon voted yes. All judges voted yes. Mateo advanced, but backstage, he collapsed into tears. He wasn't crying because he won. He was crying because for the first time, he felt seen. Weeks later, Mateo returned for the next round. He was more confident, but still humble. This time, Simon watched him differently, listening closely, laughing thoughtfully. Mateo's jokes grew sharper, deeper, more fearless. He talked about poverty, privilege, and the strange way the world decides whose pain matters. Each performance carried a twist, a moment where laughter turned into reflection. The biggest twist came during the semifinals. Mateo opened with jokes, and Simon laughed again, harder than ever. The audience roared. Then Mateo revealed that part of his prize money, if he won, would go toward building a small community center in his village. He joked that it would be the first building where people laughed before crying instead of the other way around. Simon stood up again, applauding. In the finals, Mateo delivered the performance of his life. He blended humor and heartbreak so seamlessly that the audience laughed through tears. When the final vote came, Mateo didn't win first place. For a moment, disappointment flashed across his face. Then Simon did something no one expected. Simon invited Mateo back onto the stage and told the audience that winning wasn't always about trophies. He announced that he would personally support Mateo's community center project. The theater exploded with applause. Mateo fell to his knees, overwhelmed. The poor Filipino comedian who made Simon Cowell laugh had done something greater. He had made people listen. Mateo returned to his village not as a celebrity, but as proof that stories matter. He built the center. Children performed there. Laughter filled the space where silence once lived. Mateo continued doing comedy, but he never forgot why he started. He joked so others wouldn't feel alone. And somewhere across the ocean, Simon Cowell watched clips of Mateo's journey, smiling quietly, knowing that sometimes the best laughs come from the deepest truths.